It's the 11th hour as we approach 2024 and the release of NIST's post-quantum cryptography standards. Is it possible to start protecting some critical assets today? Find out how a few applications already do so in this episode of the Post-Quantum World. I'm your host, Konstantinos Karagiannis. I lead quantum computing services at Protiviti, where we're helping companies prepare for the benefits and threats of this exploding field. I hope you'll join each episode as we explore the technology and business impacts of this post-quantum era. Our guest today is the CTO and co-founder of Qrypt, Denis Mandich. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Yeah, this is terrific. You were on over 2 years ago. It's crazy to say that. And wow. With some of the things going on in PQC today, I thought it would be a good time to have you back on. So I expect we'll cover a lot of ground. But maybe you just want to give a quick little either refresher or introduction for those who didn't catch that episode 7, I think it was, about yourself and your company.
Sure. Qrypt was founded a little over 5 years ago with the intention of bringing post-quantum safe and quantum secure systems to commercial users that were available in the government. I'm a physicist by background, but I worked for the intelligence community for 20 years, as did my co-founder. And we saw the theft of IP as being unsustainable for the next 10 years, if not less than 5 years. And we really wanted to do something about it. And to do that, we wanted to bring types of secure systems that we used in the government that are very expensive to deploy, cumbersome to use, and make them really easy for commercial industry.
Yeah, that's terrific and very, very relevant for what's going on. I expect next year to be huge, and we'll get into some of that. But first of all, what are you hearing these days with regards to NIST? So we know that next year we're expecting the finalists. Do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, I'm fairly certain it will happen from everything that they've said in the last few months. You know, we had a conference a few months ago where everyone in the industry really got together, got to hear where they stood on it, objections, interest in the actual date, which they haven't provided. But we're pretty sure that's in the next few months, you know, as early as January or maybe even sooner.
Wow. So that is truly a ticking clock. As I've talked about on the show before, once that comes out, federal agencies have to take action pretty quickly, and then we expect, I guess, the private sector to follow suit. Are private sector companies sort of knocking on your door right now and asking about how it might impact them?
Yeah, they're coming to the realization this will take a really long time, and that if they don't start now, and if something like a cryptographically relevant quantum computer comes online sooner than they expected, they just won't have time to transition. Even if you're looking at the 10 to 15-year horizon for most of these large enterprise systems, many legacy networks just need to be replaced. They can't be updated. They can't be upgraded. They're reaching end of life. And one of the immediate short-term concerns is that any equipment, especially hardware systems that they're buying now, if they're obsolete before the lifetime of those systems, their expiration date, 5 years away, they don't want to invest in it now. So they want to be sure that if they have to upgrade to these post-quantum systems for compliance industries like the government, healthcare, finance, and so on, that they're not buying something that they have to replace pretty quickly.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we do a lot of like cryptographic agility assessments and things, and the basic guidance is to prepare for the future, and then there's all these steps you're going to have to take. But every once in a while, I guess someone has something super critical that they want to start protecting now. And in a little while, we're going to talk about some of the stopgaps, the little things you could do for the really critical data paths. But when it's not a company, there's a lot of people just concerned about their own safety and messaging in the world. And one app that comes to mind is Signal. and Signal, when we talk safety there, security for Signal users could mean literally their life, depending on what country they're in. There's all sorts of instability in the world and people who want to try and stay in touch during it. So did you want to maybe explain to our listeners what happened recently with Signal?
Well, Signal was one of the first messaging services to upgrade to these new post-quantum algorithms, but also to layer it on the existing algorithms that we have out there, RSA and elliptical curves. And that's a good bet. If one of them should fail, at least the other one will be in place to provide some level of security. So even if a big quantum computer comes online tomorrow, it can break the RSA elliptical curves side of the application. At least you'll have Kyber layered on top of it, to give you that protection or at least some level of quantum safety. But again, we're not sure. And the real issue that most people see in the headlines today is, of course, harvest now and decrypt later. We have to talk about that at every one of these calls. And the safety issue in many countries is extreme. It's potentially execution in some of these denied areas, Iran, North Korea, if you're using something like that, or the loss of all of your privacy, your systems becoming public all of a sudden. And that might happen even without quantum computers. That happens with flaws in implementations of software, the randomness generation mechanism, which we talked about before, when you're generating keys that are not actually random, and so on. So there's a lot of ways they can fail. Signal is the go-to application because everyone's kicked the tires on it. Everyone understands how the crypto works. There's other ones out there like Telegram. They rolled their own crypto, which is, of course, a violation of the golden rule in this area.
That's a little scary. You should never do that, in my opinion, but yeah.
But Signal, to our knowledge, has done everything right. There's still issues with any app like Signal. If you're, for example, if you have Signal on your desktop, you've got it on your phone, you've got it on your laptop, and so on, your iPad, if you can see multiple versions of the same conversation on multiple different devices at the same time, that's an opening for big intelligence services to have one version of your conversation, your communiques on their own devices that they could read. So there's a level of security that we enjoy with Signal simply because they've transitioned to post-quantum cryptography already. But there's still things that need to be fixed for all these secure systems to really have some level of guarantee that no one else can be listening in. There's only one version that ever exists between you and I in a call, and that version dies when we hang up.
Yeah, because you have to keep track of all those devices that you have it installed on, and are there updates or, just vulnerabilities that have nothing to do with cryptography as well, right? Like if you have a vulnerable version of Signal on one machine and not another, you forget, and then your messages are potentially exposed.
Absolutely. And that's really goes to the heart of harvest now and decrypt later. 20 years ago, it required the services of a huge cyber research industry like NSA or CIA and so on to figure out where these flaws were in the software. Now you have run-of-the-mill researchers right out of college or even in grad school finding these flaws in these systems. And once they're found, everyone knows what they are and how to exploit them. Those tools are out there pretty quickly now. So again, we look at harvest now, decrypt later as a thing on the horizon because of quantum computers, but the reality is that it happens to all these applications regularly. We may not see all of them. We might find out about the patch, not realizing how many times they were exploited in the interim before those patches came out.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about an approach like signal zoom, that's typically what I call hybrid post-quantum cryptography. And we're starting to see that roll out. Of course, the newest version of Chrome supports this kind of approach. AWS supports it within its own infrastructure there. So it's one of those times I like to say that being on the cloud is more secure than not, like as you approach this quantum era. But there are still either custom written things or other paths that can't be protected by these kinds of means. So that would be where you start to look at custom solutions, right? So I guess we should roll into a few of the things that your company does today while you're waiting. And then I have a follow-up question based on the White House memorandum and some guidance. But we'll start with basically what you provide companies today that want to start securing certain critical paths.
Yeah, high-value data, high-value links. We provide a mechanism that's very similar to what quantum key distribution does, where we simultaneously generate the keys at the endpoints rather than distributing them, which is the way most of these asymmetric algorithms really work today. And if you look at the history of why we deployed those, it was an era when a single copper wire and a handful of switches connected to users. We don't live in that world today. We should never rely on a single point of failure, a single path, a single mechanism that couples the data and the encryption key distribution mechanism all in one package, making it very easy to exploit. And again, going back to harvest now, decrypt later, that's why that's even possible. it's very hard to get all that data assembled again if it's coming through different paths and the keys are decoupled from the data itself. What Qrypt does is take quantum random number generators, which we've co-developed with the national labs, Los Alamos and Oak Ridge National Lab. We flipped the QKD model, inverted it a bit, and put those into cloud data centers. We've made those available by a simple API call, so you can access as many of them as you want in the cloud. And instead of using the key exchange or key encapsulation mechanisms, these asymmetric algorithms that we're transitioning to for distributing keys, we use it to exchange a small amount of metadata. That metadata tells you which one of those cloud access points you have access to through these API calls. You're in an authenticated channel. You download quantum random numbers from these physical appliances in the cloud to each endpoint. And then the last piece of metadata only known between the communicators in this party, Alice and Bob, is how you apply cryptographic extractors, the parameters for that session and that session only. And then you can distill keys at the endpoints. And those keys are symmetric keys of any variety, any flavor of AES, which gets you to quantum safe, all the way up to a full one-time pad-based system, which of course is very expensive. You pay in data transfer and bandwidth, but what you get is quantum secure. It's provably unbreakable even by quantum computers. We believe that's true for AES, but we don't know for sure. Certainly for AES 256, we're confident in that, but we don't know for sure. So that's the differentiation that Qrypt brings, is that we leverage modern cloud infrastructure, redundant and resilient networks to generate those keys rather than this architecture we inherited from the 1970s, which is key distribution.
Yeah, one-time pad is secure as long as you don't do things like repeat messages to your dictator or something, as we've learned in history. It's probably not the way to go. So when you're using this tool, it sounds like there's multiple vectors someone would have to attack, right? They'd have to be able to attack that metadata. They'd have to be able to attack its communication with the cloud server to get the key established, and then have to maybe attack that communication with, let's say, symmetric keys. So you're introducing multiple points that would have to be exploited, a total kill chain of insanity that would have to be achieved. That definitely makes sense as a different approach. Now, that is a customized setup, right? So is this something that you would then only, like we said before, assign to really high value data? Because you wouldn't imagine doing this to like go shopping, right? Like you wouldn't do all this to go to Amazon, would you, like to buy a book, right?
It's not for cat videos.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've demonstrated on those high value data links. So we've already, in the way that you would use it similarly for QKD for two endpoints, which largely can't be scaled because you're distance limited. We don't have quantum repeaters and quantum memory yet. So we showed the same way to get that level of security from two sites in Washington, D.C., all the way to Sydney, Australia, where now you're operating under the assumption that the adversary controls all the infrastructure between those 2 points. And we don't care at that point because we generated the keys at the endpoints. We've decoupled that from the data. So the keys are not correlated with the data. They may be indexed at the endpoints. I use this key, use that key, and so on. But they're not tied to the data. The mechanism for breaking into that data is not tied to it at all. And so, it's fairly inexpensive to do now. It was really expensive to do this on the government side, of course, because when you have to communicate from the embassy in Moscow to Langley, Virginia, someone has to hand carry those keys over. Some diplomatic courier with a box with, terabytes of key material does the same thing. We do all that digitally, and we make that very easy for anyone to consume in any application. Of course, it's not free like the mechanisms we use today. But again, you enjoy a much higher level of security and privacy.
The actual communications that are done with the metadata towards the endpoints, this is kind of like a silly question in a way, but is that communication post-quantum safe? Because in a weird way, it doesn't have to be yet, right? This isn't information that'll be useful even in 1 minute, let alone in 10, 15 years. So is it just standard like TLS for now for that communication?
Yeah, because it doesn't matter almost what you use, like you said, but yeah, why not use PQC, which is what we'll do once the final version of the PQ standard comes out, because we don't have the final version
Yeah,
yet. We
of
think we
course.
do, but when that happens, then now you're breaking multiple different links at the same time. Even if you had some godlike access, super user access, of course, then they're probably on your endpoint. That's the real answer, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah, that's a whole different problem. That's not a quantum problem anymore.
But what people discuss in public now is like, well, what if the Chinese are harvesting everything from your router in your house? They're not saving that data for a quantum computer in the future. They'll just hack into your endpoint. They'll see
Yeah.
everything in clear. So we're really talking about here is these big choke points on the internet, big collection sites. That's where this stuff is filtered and collected for later exploitation, and that's really what we need to fix. And so solving that big picture problem, including that metadata exchange, which is simple TLS, a PQC version of TLS is just fine. It's only useful for a very short amount of time. And again, nobody's going to waste quantum computing resources on that. They're going to waste it on the easier target, the soft white underbelly. It's the old, we always talk about cryptography.
Yeah, of course.
How fast do you have to run to outrun the bear? Well, just faster than the guy next to you.
And it's fun because in a way, this is one of the first times that you're using something quantum to generate post-quantum cryptography. So in this case, what are you using to generate the keys?
So generating the keys is critical because, again, just years ago, this was very hard for people to find flaws in the key generation mechanism, the entropy sources that we usually find in processors. Again, 20 years ago, this was dark arts figuring that out. Now I read articles on the archive where people are like, oh my God, all I have to do is heat up the processor, and that causes this non-random effect for the key generator. I mean, simple things like that. And then there are flaws. Software developers, even enormous companies, make catastrophic errors in this space. We saw Galaxy's iPhone, not Galaxy iPhone, the Samsung Galaxy phones that had a flaw in the initialization vector for 100 million phones. Everyone knows what that is. Those keys were generating secure private keys for crypto wallets. And right after that, I'm not saying this is what happened. I'm just saying that anyone who had one of those phones only has to go generate as many keys as they want and go test them on data that they're interested in. And in many cases, people are just using it to steal cryptocurrencies. So what we did was look at how the government did it. And they have very sophisticated, super expensive sources that no one will ever pay for in industry. So we had to take them from a giant light table and a big box and reduce them into something that fits in a 1U appliance in a data center. And those physical sources are based on photon bunching. Photon bunching is the property in physics. You're a physicist, you know exactly what it is. I'll just explain this for your audience. Well, when particles of light, photons, come out of an optical amplifier, when you excite a small number of modes in that device, you'll see them come out in clumps or bunches, unlike a normal stream of light that would come out from a regular light source. And the timing between the arrivals of those bunches at a photodetector is truly quantum unknowable. We can use that to generate zeros and ones that are truly random and unpredictable. And by random here, we have to make a strong differentiation between what's used in information theory, which even NIST has cautioned this is not something you should be doing using statistical testing for cryptographic key generation to prove that your keys are random, because that's impossible to do with a test on just some numbers. We're talking about physical, quantum-based randomness, which is unknowable, meaning we can set up a test, we can perform an experiment on it, and with perfect information and knowledge about how we set it up in the initial conditions, we cannot prove the outcome will be a 0 or 1. It's impossible. The second effect is using vacuum noise from shot noise in a system where we difference across multiple different detectors. We take out all the thermal electronic noise, and what's left over is truly inhomodyne detection of light sources, the shot noise from interactions with the vacuum. And we have two others. One is phase diffusion. That's where you have the quantum unknowable here is the phase of a laser when it's switched on. And then you combine the two laser pulses at a photodetector with a path that's different by a single pulse. And when you combine them at the endpoint, it's just like waves in the ocean. Sometimes they destructively interfere and there's no wave. Sometimes they constructively interfere and you have a giant wave. We measure that by the pulse amplitude at the photodetector. We can do that very fast at gigabits per second. And then the last one is SPAD arrays. These are single photon avalanche diode, where there are thousands of them on a chip, and we can measure the on-offs for those across multiple different pixels. We can combine them, we can XOR them, and then that's another quantum unknowable. We can never predict when a single photon triggers an avalanche.
Okay, so to clarify, so there is no quantum computer being used to generate random numbers. You're just doing the quantum processes and diodes and things. Okay. Yeah.
You could use a quantum computer, super inefficient. You could, generate bits. We're generating tens of gigabits per second, which is far beyond the hope of a quantum computer.
Right now you would never have the access. Okay, that's good. I can't imagine.
That is a good way to do it. We support the people doing that. You can actually get a true quantum random number by running a random circuit on a quantum computer. That is a valid way to do it. But of course, you'll never generate a key or two a day. Not very useful.
Yeah, you'll be stuck in a queue when you're trying to actually, and not the good kind of queue like we always plug into words in the quantum industry, but the full spelled out queue word where you're waiting. Yeah, absolutely. So the follow up I wanted to talk about with this approach is so you have this custom approach and it's for high critical data. In the NSM 10 memorandum, the White House memorandum, they talk about not buying post-quantum solutions until after NIST publishes its standards, but it's okay to buy them to test, but just not implement them. So how does that kind of thing implement if you want to work with a government agency? Do they just do still in the small testing phase with you as a result of that decree?
Yeah, because the versions that are out there right now will tell you a lot about which systems are completely incompatible, that will just not work. They will fail. A lot of the legacy systems that we see today, especially some of the smaller systems on critical infrastructure, OT systems, they just won't work. They have to be replaced. So at the very least, you will learn what will work and the performance hit you will take, and maybe the latency that you get hit with for running applications with, let's say, this hybrid version of Qrypt and RSA or something like that. I'm not an advocate for that, only because I think we should have the final version and only use that, because we know RSA is quantum broken. It's something that would never have been implemented if we knew about this earlier. It predated Shor's algorithm. So we're only looking at solutions where we absolutely know that they're secure, or we know that there's no easy way to break them. And that theory in itself has been tested in the last year, as you know, with Rainbow and Psych and what happened. We can talk about
side channel attack. Yeah.
Yeah. But even with Psych, it was brute force, right? And so that was one of the two finalists in the NIST competition. And the point that really from NSM 8, NSM 10, and the executive orders is that, look, we don't know what the final version is yet. You can learn a lot by testing with them. But Psych was a hard lesson learned that Qrypt may fail. I'm an advocate for it. I'm not suggesting that we should not transition to it. We absolutely should transition off RSA, but we don't know that there's no proof of hardness that it will last and be durable, which is the whole idea behind crypto agility. Psych had excellent security parameters that we thought, only to be broken by a laptop computer that was 10 years old. So that really means that we need something better architecturally. We can't rely on this mechanism again, this single point of failure from these older architectures that we had to deal with in the 70s and the 80s. We need to move on past that, which is what Qrypt advocates for. Yes, switch everything to Qrypt, or we're calling it ML Chem now, and then everything else will fall into place.
Yeah, and the hybrid approach, though, you're technically allowed to roll it out in a private company, right? I mean, if someone wanted to, just like AWS has their hybrid approach, so they exist. I was getting a lot of sort of questions after the big Crystal's Kyber hack in quotes, because I never viewed it as a hack when you write the implementation of the code and then hack it. That's sort of not really, very exciting. I don't know if you wanted to talk about Crystal's Kyber at all and why it's still basically safe. That was just like a proof of concept of an attack, technically.
Yeah, there are always going to be side channel attacks, especially when you've written the software on a specific piece of hardware that has certain vulnerabilities in it. With with that version of it, we haven't seen the dust settle on all that yet, so I probably won't comment on that yet. But the final version of Crystal's Kyber will have very similar performance characteristics to that one, maybe even better than that one. And then we'll really see what happens. Until you deploy this on millions of processors, millions of laptops, millions of phones, and so you won't really find all these bugs. Again, it's not easy to go from a side channel attack where you have direct physical access to the hardware to something that can be done remotely. That happens. And if that's possible, that's something that needs to be fixed before it's widely deployed. Because as you know, people deploy libraries, people deploy systems and don't patch them, sometimes for years. And if we let that happen, again, that's why the government is saying wait, and that's partially because Psych fell. That's excellent advice. And the hybrid approach, having RSA in this current version of Kyber is better than nothing. But again, we have to transition to a world where there's no RSA inside. It's just Kyber, and everyone needs to adapt because we want these performance systems to work. We don't want these hybrid systems that slow everyone down. Then they don't want them. They turn it off somehow. They drop down to an older version of TLS, which has happened before.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like it's just to get a headline. For example, the latest version of Chrome, like we said, yeah, it does have the hybrid solution. But for that to really work, it's got to talk to something on the other end. And I don't know how many websites, I don't know how many servers you're reaching out to are actually going to do that. I would bet the number is incredibly small. I haven't seen a single thing written about it, honestly. I'll have to dig a little deeper maybe, but I haven't seen anyone say, yeah, and on our end, we're supporting it too. But it is nice to know it's there. Whereas with Signal, it's more of a complete end-to-end. You have the latest version of Signal, you're good. You're good to go. So that's kind of impressive. Are there any industries then who are more excited right now about rolling out this kind of solution that you have?
Yeah, it's really telecoms, banking, critical infrastructure, and government, because they can enjoy a higher level of security that you can't get with just a basic transition from one older classical algorithm to a quantum one. And people have been testing QKD systems for years. NSA's objections seem insurmountable right now, that they will not allow it on federal systems, which is a problem because it has very good characteristics that we would like on a network. Unfortunately, it's cumbersome to deploy because you need physical hardware at the endpoint. You still need that authenticated classical channel. That's NSA's main objection, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't incorporate it into other hybrid systems that use both PQC and QKD. So for us, we see this as the time to really figure this out quickly, not, again, going back to an earlier point, don't buy systems that will be incompatible. Make sure the version of Signal that has PQC in it works on some of these devices. That's a really simple, easy way to test it, right? You'll see if there's a performance hit on those systems. Use the version of Chrome that has PQC built into it for some web application that you're using. You're both using the same version of Chrome. You will have a PQC connection. You'll see what happens. It might not work on an older laptop, but then at least you know that you have to budget for that next year or the year after that. And I think those industries, again, where the valuable data is, it's like Dillinger said, attack banks because that's where the money is, and that's what hackers do, and nation states, and they go after the banks, they go after government data, and that's why the government is so obsessed with it and really forcing this on everyone else, right? That's the entire logic behind HR 3575 or 7535 is that every government agency must transition to post-quantum, and that really means all their vendors. If you want to do business with the government, you have to be quantum safe. And that means all the software and hardware that you integrate with the government, because they don't build these systems anymore, has to transition over the next 10 years, which I think is unrealistic. It's going to be 15 to 20 years.
And I guess last major question, have any regulators talked to you like on the private side, like X9 or something like that? Like anyone who's expected to start hounding all their constituents in the coming year?
Yeah, I'm a member of X9 and the quantum group that we work with a larger team with mostly the financial industry, the big banks there. We did a study that we finished, I think last year or 2 years ago, that laid everything bare for everyone to understand, like what is quantum, what do these algorithms really mean. What does a quantum computer do that a regular one can't do, and so on, just to educate the community. Now we're going on to the next step, which is, it's not come out yet, but here's a questionnaire that you can go ask yourself, your CISO, your network architects, and so on. Answer these questions. These are really simple things to go out and start planning for. Getting crypto agile. What does a transition look like? When do I need to budget for this? So it's really starting, and those standards organizations and ADIS, again, on the telecom side, are all doing something in the space because they want to get aligned. You need all the banks and all the financial payment card industry people to be on the same page, or you can't do transactions. If you're on a classical certificate-based system and signatures, you can't do a transaction with a quantum that is insisting that everyone use these post-quantum signatures. These are incompatible things, and that's a huge problem for the industry. There's things like bridge certificates and so on, which is outside of my domain. But the complexity of transitioning will take a long time, simply because the internet was tiny when we did this last time 20 years ago, right? The scale of digital networks, the cloud, none of this stuff existed. And now we have to move all of that in 10 years. It's going to be tough.
Yeah, and it's an opportunity to start thinking about correcting, structural issues from the past too, right? Like as we think about a quantum internet one day, like can we avoid some of the flaws? Because in some ways, when you look at internet attacks, they all feel like when you would used to click on a phone to get it to dial for free, to payphone or something, because it was all the same signal path. Everything was being sent, trusted over the same pathway. So that's why your company's approach is kind of interesting, separating out that key spot and key moment, and then having the transfer occur. So I wanted to let our listeners know some of the stopgap kind of post-quantum things that are in the works right now until we get these standards any day now or any month now, but very, very soon, I think.
Yeah, I was just in Europe and the UK for their big quantum conference there. And you mentioned the quantum internet, which they now object to. They don't want people thinking that we're going to have some huge QKD network that connects people and moves data around. And they're trying to get away from that concept. And one of the speakers at the conference was from British Telecom, I won't quote them. And they really want to start thinking about this as a longer-term transition of what we do already today, just at a higher level of security, but not that kind of almost esoteric belief that it's just truly quantum, secured by the laws of physics, which it really will never be. I think the quantum internet will exist. It'll just connect quantum computers together.
Exactly.
We won't be moving around information the way people think. We're not going to have a quantum handset.
Yeah, no, of course. That's a key point. And quantum networking in general is something people don't really understand. They don't get what it is. And it is, like you said, more about like what we can do and how we can connect computers together and get performance gains from that too. That's what we're hoping to get. So this was a great conversation. Thanks so much for coming on. And I guess maybe we'll end up talking after on the other side of the NIST standards and see what happens when everything settles there.
Yeah, we're testing. Everyone's trying it out now. It's coming fast and furious. And I think, like you said in the beginning of the show, 2024 is going to be an explosive year for this. It'll be companies using this as a differentiator. I have a quantum safe solution. You don't. My application, my service, my web app, whatever it might be, is quantum safe or it's not. And so very, very exciting. And we'll be catching up in probably 6 months then.
Yeah, absolutely. Now it's time for Coherence, the Quantum Executive Summary, where I take a moment to highlight some of the business impacts we discussed today, in case things got too nerdy at times. Let's recap. Qrypt has been working on bringing practical post-quantum cryptography to market for about 5 years. The company has offerings that will work before the expected standards from NIST. Denis feels that the NIST target date of 2024 for those new standards is still looking good, by the way. This means all the timelines we've discussed on this show in the past are still expected to kick in for federal agencies and likely for financials and other regulated industries soon after. Some businesses can expect to have to do cryptographic inventories and create remediation plans relatively quickly. Then, as these companies work toward a remediation deadline of 10 years or so, they'll have to adapt to the deprecations of ciphers that will occur. And some legacy systems will have to go, as there will be no path forward for them. All this takes time. But what can you do now to protect critical communications? Signal has already implemented hybrid post-quantum cryptography, which is when you wrap today's encryption with a post-quantum finalist. Some people rely on Signal to literally save their lives in certain parts of the world, so it was an industry-pushing move for the app to add these protections. Google Chrome's latest version has hybrid support too, as do certain cloud environments and workloads. AWS pioneered this internally for their customers, for example. Qrypt offers a solution that creates truly random keys with a quantum device and uses the cloud to send those keys securely to endpoints. These symmetric keys can then be used by the endpoints to communicate over standard networks and send data in a way that is safe from harvest now, decrypt later attacks. The solution is more flexible than quantum key distribution in that the endpoints don't need to be connected with a fiber and face distance limitations. But it is still very much for high-value endpoints that need to communicate point-to-point, like QKD. You wouldn't use this for shopping online. That does it for this episode. Thanks to Denis Mandich for joining to discuss Qrypt, and thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to Protiviti's The Post-Quantum World, and maybe leave a review to help others find us. Be sure to follow me on all socials at Constant Hacker. That's Constant with a K, Hacker. You'll find links there to what we're doing in quantum computing services at Protiviti. You can also DM me questions or suggestions for what you'd like to hear on the show. For more information on our quantum services, check out Protiviti.com or follow Protiviti Tech on Twitter and LinkedIn. Until next time, be kind and stay quantum curious.